Blood money and champagne all smell the same when they spill on marble floors. Most people think monsters hide in the shadows, but in New York's upper crust, they wear tailored tuxedos and smile at charity galas. Clara didn't belong in their world of silk and venom. When the city's elite decided to humiliate her for not fitting into their size 0 glass slippers, they forgot one crucial detail. The biggest monster in the room was already obsessively in love with her. Flour dusted the air of sugar and lace, catching the morning sunlight like tiny suspended diamonds. Clara Hayes wiped the back of her wrist across her forehead, leaving a faint white streak against her flushed skin. She was 26, built with soft curves and a warmth that seemed to radiate into the very pastries she baked. Her bakery, nestled in a quiet corner of the Upper East Side, was a sanctuary of butter vanilla and spun sugar. It was a world away from the cutthroat corporate empires and shadowed syndicates that secretly ran the city. Or so she thought. For the past 3 months, a black luxury sedan with heavily tinted windows had been parking across the street every Tuesday and Friday at precisely 7 in the morning. A man would walk in, always dressed in an immaculate, dark, custom-tailored suit that whispered of European craftsmanship. His name was Dominic Russo. The tabloids called him a real estate mogul, a venture capitalist with a golden touch. The streets whispered something entirely different. They said the Russo family hadn't built their fortune on venture capital. They had built it on blood extortion and absolute control over the eastern seaboard's shipping ports. Clara knew nothing of the whispers. She only knew that Dominic had eyes the color of dark roast coffee, a jawline carved from granite, and a presence that seemed to suck the oxygen right out of the small bakery. He always ordered the same thing, 1 black coffee and 1 strawberry tart, and he always left $100 bill in the tip jar, despite her constant flustered protests. "You can't keep doing this, Mr. Russo." Clara had scolded him just last week, pushing the crisp bill back across the counter. Dominic had simply smiled, a dangerous, slow curve of his lips that made her stomach do a complicated flip. "I pay for quality, Clara, and I enjoy the view." She hadn't known what to make of that comment, her cheeks burning as she retreated to the safety of her ovens. But today, there was no black sedan. Instead, a courier in a crisp uniform walked through the doors, handing Clara a heavy envelope, sealed with golden wax. Her assistant, Sarah, leaned over the counter, eyes wide. "Is that what I think it is?" Clara broke the wax seal, her fingers trembling slightly, as she pulled out a thick, cream-colored cardstock. The gold leaf lettering practically glowed under the bakery lights. "The board of directors cordially invites you to the annual St. Regis Heritage Gala." The Heritage Gala. Sarah gasped, grabbing Clara's arm. "Clara, that's the most exclusive charity event in the state. It's at the Beaumont Manor tonight. How did you get an invite?" I don't know," Clara stammered, reading her own name, perfectly calligraphed on the invitation. "They contracted us to provide the dessert towers this year. Maybe it's a courtesy invite for the vendors." "Vendors go in the back door." "Clara, this is a VIP guest invitation. You have to go. You absolutely have to go." The anxiety was immediate, pooling heavy and cold in Clara's stomach. The women who attended the Heritage Gala were the kind of women Clara only saw on the covers of high-fashion magazines. They were sharp, angular, and ruthless. They wore dresses that cost more than her entire bakery's annual lease. Clara looked down at her flour-stained apron, acutely aware of the softness of her waist, the fullness of her hips. She had spent her entire life trying to shrink, trying to fit into a world that constantly told her she was too much, too loud, too soft, too big. "I don't have anything to wear, Sarah. I can't go. I'd look ridiculous." "Nonsense," Sarah said, untying Clara's apron. We close at 3 today. We are going to that boutique on Fifth Avenue, and we are finding you a dress that will make every single billionaire in that room weep." Hours later, Clara found herself standing in front of a floor-to-ceiling mirror in a hushed, velvet-lined dressing room. The dress she had eventually chosen was a masterpiece of deep, jewel-toned emerald silk. It didn't try to hide her body. Instead, it draped and cinched in ways that accentuated her hourglass figure, featuring an off-the-shoulder neckline that exposed her collarbones and a subtle slit that hinted at her legs. It was the most beautiful garment she had ever worn, and yet, staring at her reflection, the voice of doubt whispered loudly in her ear. "You're an imposter," the voice said. "They're going to eat you alive." She took a deep breath, smoothing the silk over her hips. She was a successful business owner. She had built her life from scratch. She deserved to celebrate her contract with the Gala. What Clara didn't know, what she couldn't possibly fathom, was that the invitation was no administrative error, nor was it a courtesy. 3 miles away in a penthouse overlooking the glittering skyline, Dominic Rousseau stood buttoning his tuxedo. His second-in-command, a heavily scarred man named Vincent, stood by the doorway holding a tablet. "The perimeter is secure, boss. The Belmonots are expecting you at 8. Vincent paused, looking up from the screen. "And the girl, Miss Hayes, her invitation was delivered." Dominic said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. He adjusted his cufflinks, his eyes cold and focused. "Make sure my private detail keeps an eye on her until I arrive. No one touches her. No one bothers her. Tonight she steps into my world." The Beaumont Manor was not just a venue. It was an institution of old money and generational wealth. The sweeping marble staircases, the cascading crystal chandeliers, and the walls adorned with Renaissance art created an atmosphere of oppressive luxury. As Clara stepped out of her modest cab, she felt the immediate glaring contrast between herself and the sea of Lamborghinis, Bentleys, and Rolls-Royces pulling up to the valet. She walked up the red carpet, clutching her small clutch bag so tightly her knuckles turned white. The flashing cameras of the paparazzi temporarily blinded her, though the photographers quickly lowered their lenses when they realized she wasn't a recognizable celebrity or heiress. That small dismissal was the first sting of the evening. Inside the ballroom was a spectacle of excess. Champagne flowed in crystal fountains, and a string quartet played classical arrangements of modern pop songs in the corner. Clara navigated through the crowd, acutely aware of the stares. She felt like a vibrant emerald stain on a canvas of stark white, black, and silver. The women around her were wraith-like, their collarbones sharp enough to cut glass, draped in sheer fabrics that clung to their impossibly thin frames. Clara found refuge near one of the massive stone pillars by the bar. She ordered a sparkling water and tried to make herself as invisible as possible, watching the elite mingle and plot. And then she saw her, Victoria Kensington. Victoria was the daughter of a shipping magnate who controlled half the freight entering New York. She was tall, blonde, and devastatingly cruel. Clara recognized her immediately. Victoria had come into the bakery once, ordered a dozen cupcakes, complained about the calorie count loudly, and left without paying, claiming the smell alone made her gain weight. Victoria was holding court in the center of the room, surrounded by her usual sycophants, Chloe and Beatrice. As Clara watched, Victoria's cold, ice-blue eyes scanned the room, stopping dead when they landed on the emerald silk. Clara froze. She saw Victoria's lips curl into a vicious, predatory smirk. Victoria leaned in, whispering something behind her champagne flute to Chloe. Chloe let out a sharp, braying laugh, turning to look directly at Clara. The three women began to move across the ballroom floor. They moved like sharks, scenting blood in the water. Clara's heart began to hammer against her ribs. She looked for an exit, but the crowd was too dense. "Well, well, well," Victoria purred as she arrived, looking Clara up and down with exaggerated disgust. "I thought I recognized the smell of cheap vanilla and desperation. What on earth is the help doing on the guest side of the ropes?" Clara swallowed hard, forcing herself to stand tall. "I was invited, Miss Kensington. I received a personal invitation." "A personal invitation," Chloe echoed, covering her mouth in mock shock. "Did the caterers run out of food and need you to act as a human barricade?" A few people standing nearby chuckled. The sound was like physical blows. Clara's face burned hot. "I'm here to enjoy the evening just like you. Excuse me." She tried to step around them, but Victoria shifted, blocking her path. The circle around them was widening, the string quartet's music, suddenly feeling too quiet against the rising tension in the room. The cruelty of high society was a spectator sport, and Clara was the night's main event. "Enjoy the evening, sweetheart. This isn't a county fair," Victoria sneered, her voice carrying loudly over the ambient noise. She gestured to Clara's dress. "Who designed that tent manufacturer? I suppose it takes a lot of silk to cover all that." Laughter erupted from the surrounding guests. Clara felt the air leave her lungs. It was her worst nightmare, manifesting in front of hundreds of the most powerful people in the city. Her hands shook, and she felt the hot, humiliating prick of tears gathering in the corners of her eyes. "You know," Victoria continued, stepping closer, her voice dropping to a theatrical whisper that somehow carried even further. "There's a reason women like you don't belong here. You're undisciplined. You're soft. You lack the control it takes to be one of us. Wearing a pretty green dress doesn't hide the fact that you're just a bloated baker who ate her own profits." The room fell deadly silent. Even the string quartet trailed off, leaving a suffocating quiet in the massive ballroom. Clara's chest heaved. The humiliation was absolute. She felt stripped bare, completely exposed and defenseless. She looked around, hoping for one sympathetic face, but found only amusement, disdain, and cold curiosity. She had to leave. She had to run. Clara took a step back, turning blindly toward the exit, a single tear escaping and tracking through her carefully applied makeup. But before she could take another step, a voice sliced through the silence. It wasn't a loud voice. It was calm, steady, and practically vibrating with an undercurrent of lethal violence. "Is there a problem here, Victoria?" The temperature in the ballroom seemed to drop 10 degrees. The crowd parted instantly, practically throwing themselves out of the way to make a path. Clara turned her head, her breath hitching. Dominic Russo walked into the clearing. He was a vision of terrifying elegance. His black tuxedo was immaculate, emphasizing the broad, powerful lines of his shoulders. But it was his face that made the room freeze. His dark eyes were fixed on Victoria, with a stare so intensely cold it could have shattered glass. Behind him walked two men in identical suits. Vincent and another man Clara didn't recognize, their hands resting casually near the inside of their jackets. Victoria's cruel smirk faltered, replaced instantly by a nervous, eager smile. "Dominic, Mr. Russo. No problem at all. We were just making conversation with the catering staff." Dominic didn't look at Victoria. He walked straight past her, his gaze locking on to Clara. He saw the tear on her cheek. He saw the way she was trembling. The muscle in his jaw feathered a microscopic twitch that betrayed the volcanic rage boiling beneath his calm exterior. He stopped directly in front of Clara. Reaching into his breast pocket, he pulled out a pristine white silk handkerchief and gently, with terrifying tenderness, wiped the tear from her face. "You look breathtaking," he murmured, his voice meant only for her. Clara let out a shaky breath, completely bewildered. "Dominic, what are you?" He turned, slowly positioning himself so that he was standing slightly in front of Clara, shielding her from the room. When he looked back at Victoria, the tenderness was gone, replaced by the predator the underworld feared. "You were making conversation," Dominic repeated, his voice deadly quiet. "Just a little joke, Dominic." Victoria laughed, though it sounded shrill and terrified. "She doesn't quite fit in, does she? I mean, look at her. She's completely out of her depth." "She is my guest," Dominic stated. The words landed like a bomb. The collective gasp from the room was audible. Victoria's face drained of all color, turning an ashen, sickly white. Your guest," Victoria stammered. "But Mr. Russo, I thought we didn't know." "You didn't know?" Dominic interrupted, his tone even. "You didn't know that the woman you just decided to publicly humiliate is the only reason I attended this farce of an event. You didn't know that you were insulting someone who is under my personal protection." He snapped his fingers. Instantly, the general manager of the Beaumont Manor, a sweating, terrified-looking man named Charles Hastings, practically sprinted to Dominic's side. "Mr. Russo," Hastings panted, bowing slightly. "How can I be of assistance? Is there an issue?" Dominic didn't take his eyes off Victoria. "Mr. Hastings, who owns this venue?" "The Beaumont Trust, sir," Hastings replied nervously. "A consortium of real estate investors." "Not anymore," Dominic said. He held out his hand. Vincent immediately placed a sleek black phone into Dominic's palm. Dominic dialed a single digit and put it on speaker. "Yes, boss?" A crisp voice answered over the phone. "The Beaumont Trust," Dominic said. "Initiate the hostile takeover. I want the majority shares of this property acquired immediately. Offer double the market value. If they refuse, crush their subsidiary holdings until they beg us to take it." "Consider it done. Give me 3 minutes," the voice replied, and the line went dead. The silence in the room was absolute. Nobody breathed. People were watching a billionaire casually purchase a historic multi-million-dollar estate as if he were buying a cup of coffee. Victoria was shaking now, stepping backward. "Dominic, please." It was a misunderstanding. Dominic checked his heavy silver watch. The room waited in agonizing silence. Exactly 3 minutes later, Hastings' earpiece crackled. The manager's eyes widened in sheer disbelief, and he looked at Dominic with a new, profound level of terror. "Sir," Hastings whispered, The transfer just went through. You are now the majority owner of the Beaumont Manor." Dominic finally smiled, but there was no warmth in it. It was the smile of a wolf baring its teeth. He pocketed his phone and looked at the manager. "Excellent. Mr. Hastings, as the new owner of this venue, I find the current clientele severely lacking in basic manners." Dominic pointed a single perfectly manicured finger at Victoria Kensington and her 2 friends. "Throw them out." Victoria gasped. "You can't do this. My father is—" "Your father?" Dominic cut her off, his voice finally rising, echoing off the marble pillars. "Moves cargo because I allow him to use my docks. By tomorrow morning, his shipping contracts will be dissolved. His freighters will rot in the harbor. He is going to lose everything, Victoria, and when he asks why, you are going to tell him it was because you couldn't keep your mouth shut." He looked back at Hastings, who was paralyzed with fear. "I said throw them out, and if they resist, my men will be happy to assist." Vincent took a step forward, his hand slipping inside his jacket. That was all it took. Victoria, tears streaming down her ruined makeup, turned and fled toward the exit, pushing blindly through the crowd. Chloe and Beatrice scrambled after her like frightened rats. The heavy oak doors of the ballroom slammed shut behind them, sounding like a gunshot. Dominic slowly turned his back on the terrified elite of New York. He looked down at Clara, the coldness in his eyes melting away, replaced by a fierce, burning devotion that terrified her almost as much as the violence he had just displayed. "I apologize for the scene. Mia loose my light," he said softly, offering her his arm. "Shall we get some fresh air?" Clara looked at his arm, then up at his face. She realized with a sudden dizzying clarity that she had just stepped off a cliff into a world she couldn't possibly understand. But as she placed her trembling hand on his arm, feeling the solid, immovable strength of him beneath the fine wool of his suit, she knew one thing for certain. No one would ever dare mock her again. Cold night air hit Clara's flushed face the moment Dominic guided her through the heavy French doors and out onto the sprawling stone terrace of the Beaumont Manor. The manicured gardens below were bathed in silver moonlight, a stark contrast to the stifling, glittering venom of the ballroom they had just abandoned. Away from the prying eyes and the suffocating whispers of New York's elite, the reality of what had just transpired crashed down on her shoulders like an anvil. She pulled her hand out from the crook of his arm, stumbling back a few steps. Her emerald silk dress whispered against the stone. "Clara." Dominic said his voice, dropping an octave, losing the sharp, lethal edge it had carried indoors. He reached a hand out toward her, but paused when she flinched. "Who are you?" She breathed, her chest heaving. "Who are you really, Dominic? Because the man who comes into my bakery every Tuesday and Friday for a strawberry tart does not buy historic estates on a whim, just to fire the guests." Dominic slowly lowered his hand, sliding it into the pocket of his trousers. The soft lighting from the terrace sconces cast long, sharp shadows across his face, highlighting the brutal patrician angles of his jaw. He didn't look like a venture capitalist anymore. He looked like a king assessing his conquered territory. "I am exactly who I have always been with you," he replied evenly. "A man who appreciates your baking, Clara. But outside of your shop, I manage complicated assets, and I do not tolerate disrespect toward the people I care about." "Care about?" Clara echoed, her voice cracking. "Dominic, you just ruined a man's entire shipping empire because his daughter made a cruel joke about my weight. That isn't care. That is madness. You destroyed a family in 3 minutes. I destroyed a parasite." Dominic corrected his tone, chillingly casual. "Arthur Kensington has been skimming cargo manifests off my docks for 3 years. I was going to dismantle his operation next month anyway. His daughter's inability to control her venomous tongue merely accelerated my timeline. It was a convenient excuse to end a tedious business relationship." Clara stared at him, her mind spinning. "Your docks, Dominic the Kensingtons, own the largest freight company on the eastern seaboard. And they operate on my concrete," Dominic stated simply. He took a slow step toward her, his dark eyes locking onto hers with an intensity that made her pulse thunder in her ears. "You think this world is run by the people wearing the most expensive diamonds in that ballroom. It isn't. It is run by the men who own the ports, the supply lines, the foundations those ballrooms are built upon. I am the foundation, Clara." She wrapped her arms around her waist, suddenly acutely aware of how exposed she was. "Why may I bake pastries? I wake up at 4 in the morning to knead dough. I don't belong in a world where billions of dollars are moved over a spilled tear." Dominic's expression softened, a terrifyingly tender look crossing his hardened features. "Do you remember last November, the week before Thanksgiving?" Clara frowned, struggling to pull the memory through the chaos of her current panic. "What about it?" "A local enforcer from the Rossi crew decided he wanted to collect a new protection fee from the businesses on your block," Dominic said, his voice quiet, almost reverent. He walked into Sugar and Lace, smashed one of your display cases, and demanded $3,000 in cash. Clara's breath hitched. She remembered the terrifying incident vividly. How do you know about that? The police never even followed up. I know because I happened to be sitting in a black sedan across the street, preparing to meet with one of my lieutenants about that very rogue enforcer, Dominic explained. I watched you, Clara. I watched a man twice your size carrying a loaded weapon try to intimidate you. And what did you do? Clara swallowed hard. I hit him with a rolling pin and chased him out with a canister of industrial pepper spray. A genuine dark chuckle escaped Dominic's lips. You defended your sanctuary with a wooden stick and absolute unyielding fury. You were magnificent. The enforcer was arrested by my men 2 blocks away. He no longer works in this city. Dominic closed the distance between them, stopping mere inches away. His hand reached out his knuckles, gently grazing the soft curve of her cheek. You think you don't belong here, because they told you that you don't fit their mold. But you possess more fire, more courage, and more loyalty in your little finger than everyone in that ballroom combined. You are real, Clara. In a world made of plastic and glass, you are the only real thing I have ever found. Tears pricked Clara's eyes again, but this time they were born of overwhelming confusion and an undeniable magnetic pull. No one had ever looked at her like this. No one had ever seen the fire she kept hidden beneath her soft exterior and celebrated it. The men in her past had always wanted her to shrink, to eat less, to speak softer, to take up less space. Dominic Russo wanted her to burn down the sky. Before she could process the weight of his confession, the heavy terrace doors banged open. Vincent Dominic's heavily scarred second-in-command strode out onto the stone patio. His demeanor had completely changed. The calm, composed bodyguard was gone. In his place was a soldier ready for war. He wasn't looking at Clara. His eyes were scanning the dark tree line beyond the manicured gardens. Boss, Vincent said, his voice a tight, clipped bark. We have a massive problem. The hostile takeover of the Beaumont Trust triggered a tripwire in the Costa family's financial network. The trust was a front for Lorenzo Costa's money laundering. Dominic's hand dropped from Clara's face. His entire body went rigid instantly, transforming back into the ruthless apex predator. Lorenzo is using this venue as a wash. Yes, Vincent confirmed, drawing a suppressed matte black pistol from beneath his tuxedo jacket. And he knows you're here. The Kensingtons weren't acting alone. Victoria's mockery was a calculated distraction. Lorenzo paid them to create a scene, hoping you'd step in and expose your position without your full security detail. We have 3 black SUVs pulling up to the perimeter gates, heavily armed. Clara's blood ran cold. Heavily armed, Dominic, what is going on? We are leaving now, Dominic ordered. He grabbed Clara's hand, his grip like a steel vice, pulling her behind him. Panic erupted like a physical force in the air. Get her to the armored transport in the south loading dock. Dominic ordered Vincent, not missing a beat, as he pulled a small, sleek firearm from an ankle holster Clara hadn't even realized he was wearing. Radio the vanguard. I want suppressing fire on those gates before Lorenzo's men breach the courtyard. Wait! Clara cried out, her high heels scraping against the stone as she struggled to keep up with his massive strides. Dominic, they're going to shoot up a charity gala. There are hundreds of innocent people inside. Lorenzo Costa does not care about collateral damage. Clara, Dominic said grimly, pushing her toward a narrow set of stone stairs that led down to the service exits. His only goal tonight is to put a bullet in my head, and he'll burn this entire manor to the ground to do it. As if on cue, The sharp, deafening crack of automatic gunfire shattered the night air. Clara screamed, slapping her hands over her ears, as the beautiful stained-glass windows of the Beaumont Manor's east wing exploded outward in a shower of glittering shards. Screams echoed from inside the ballroom, the string quartet's music instantly replaced by the terrifying symphony of absolute chaos. "Down!" Vincent roared, shoving Clara and Dominic behind a thick stone balustrade just as a volley of bullets chipped the masonry where they had been standing a second prior. Dust and powdered stone rained down on Clara's pristine emerald dress. She was trembling uncontrollably, her chest tight with a blinding panic. This wasn't a movie. This wasn't a late-night crime documentary. Real bullets were tearing through the air, aimed directly at the man shielding her with his own body. Dominic hovered over her, his broad shoulders completely covering her. Despite the gunfire tearing apart the masonry above them, his heart rate pressing against her back felt terrifyingly steady. "Breathe me a loose," Dominic commanded softly, his lips brushing against her ear. "You are safe. I swear on my life they will not touch you." He rolled off her, popping up from behind the balustrade, just long enough to fire 3 rapid, precise shots into the darkness below. A heavy thud and a scream from the garden indicated he had hit his mark. "Clear," Vincent shouted, moving down the stairs with lethal fluidity. Dominic hauled Clara to her feet, basically carrying her down the stone steps. They reached the service corridor, bursting through the doors into the stainless steel industrial kitchen. The catering staff had already fled, leaving behind trays of half-prepared caviar and overturned pots. The smell of saffron and butter mixed sickeningly with the acrid stench of cordite and gun smoke drifting in from outside. Through the loading bay, Vincent directed kicking open the double doors at the back of the kitchen. A massive armored black SUV was idling in the bay, its engine a low, aggressive growl. 2 more of Dominic's men were stationed outside it, providing covering fire toward the main driveway, where Lorenzo's men were trying to advance. "Get in!" Dominic shouted, practically throwing Clara into the back seat before diving in after her. Vincent slammed the door shut and jumped into the driver's seat. The tires shrieked against the concrete as the heavy vehicle surged forward, tearing through the metal security gates of the loading dock and accelerating onto the dark, winding road leading away from the estate. Clara collapsed against the rich leather seats, her breath coming in ragged, shallow gasps. She looked down at her hands. They were covered in white dust from the stone balustrade, and there was a small smear of blood on her wrist where she had scraped it against a wall. "Are you hurt?" Dominic demanded, his hands immediately roaming over her arms, her neck checking for injuries. He saw the blood and swore violently in Italian. "It's just a scrape," Clara managed to choke out, pulling away from his frantic inspection. She pressed herself against the opposite door of the SUV, staring at him as if he were a ghost. Because in a way he was. The handsome, quiet man who bought strawberry tarts was dead. In his place sat the Don of the Russo Syndicate, a man with gunpowder on his tuxedo jacket and murder in his eyes. "You used me," Clara whispered the realization, hitting her with the force of a physical blow. Dominic froze. "What? Victoria Kensington?" Clara said, her voice shaking, though whether from adrenaline or fury she couldn't tell. "You said she was a calculated distraction. Lorenzo Costa set you up, which means he knew you were coming tonight. He knew you'd step in if I was threatened." Vincent's eyes flicked to the rearview mirror, but he stayed silent, focusing on navigating the armored SUV through the twisting back roads of the Hamptons. Dominic's jaw tightened. He didn't look away from her. "Lorenzo knew I had a weakness." "Yes, I am your weakness," Clara said, the tears finally spilling over. "I'm not a guest, Dominic. I'm leverage. I'm a pawn in whatever mafia war you're fighting. That's why I got the invitation. That's why Victoria mocked me. It was all a stage play to draw you out, and I was the bait. You were never supposed to be in danger, Dominic said, his voice dropping to a harsh, ragged whisper. The absolute control he had maintained all evening was finally fracturing. I thought my presence alone would deter any physical move Lorenzo might make. I underestimated his desperation. That is a failure I will live with for the rest of my life. But do not ever think you are just a pawn to me, Clara. He slid across the expansive back seat, ignoring her flinch, and took her dusty, blood-smeared hands in his own. Lorenzo targeted you because my men have spent the last 3 months tearing the city apart to ensure the streets around your bakery are the safest in New York. He targeted you because I bought the building your bakery is in through a shell corporation, just so your landlord couldn't raise your rent. He targeted you because the entire underworld knows that Dominic Russo has finally found something he values more than power, more than money, and more than his own life. Clara stared at him, paralyzed by the sheer, suffocating weight of his confession. He owned her building. He policed her streets. He had built a golden cage around her without her even realizing it, locking her inside his dark, violent world under the guise of protection. "Take me home," Clara whispered, her voice devoid of emotion. "I can't," Dominic replied gently, though the finality in his tone brooked no argument. "Lorenzo knows where you live. He knows about sugar and lace. Until I put Lorenzo Costa in the ground, you are not stepping foot back in the city." "You can't kidnap me," Clara shouted, slamming her hands against his chest. It was like hitting a brick wall. "I am saving your life," Dominic countered, catching her wrists and holding them firmly but gently against his chest. "You are going to my secure compound in upstate New York. It is a fortress. You will have everything you need. But you are not leaving my sight, Clara. Not tonight. Not ever." Clara looked into his dark, obsessive eyes and realized the terrifying truth. Victoria Kensington's mockery had been cruel, but it had been fleeting. The real trap had sprung the moment Dominic Russo walked into her bakery 3 months ago. She hadn't just caught the eye of a billionaire. She had become the singular obsession of a monster. And as the armored SUV disappeared into the pitch-black night, speeding away from the burning ruins of the life she once knew, Clara finally understood that escaping the monster was impossible. The only choice left was to learn how to survive the dark. Tires chewed through the rugged, winding mountain roads of the Adirondacks, carrying them further away from the glittering wreckage of Clara's old life. By the time the armored SUV passed through the towering steel gates of the Lake Placid compound, dawn was threatening to break, painting the horizon in bruised shades of purple and black. The fortress was a brutalist masterpiece of poured concrete, dark timber, and bulletproof glass, seamlessly built into the side of a jagged cliff. It looked less like a home and more like a high-tech bunker, disguised as a billionaire's mountain retreat. As the vehicle finally lurched to a halt inside a subterranean garage, Clara felt completely numb. The adrenaline that had kept her heart hammering against her ribs had burned away, leaving behind a cold, hollow exhaustion. Dominic stepped out, first offering his hand. She ignored it, sliding out of the leather seat and wrapping her arms around her ruined emerald dress. "Vincent, secure the perimeter and activate the thermal grid," Dominic ordered, his voice echoing sharply in the cavernous garage. "I want a heavily armed detail on every access road. If a single stray deer crosses the property line, I want to know about it." "On it, boss." Vincent grunted, pressing a hand to his ribs where a stray piece of shrapnel had torn through his jacket during their escape. Dominic turned his full attention back to Clara. The dangerous, frantic energy of the shootout had settled back into his terrifyingly calm, calculated demeanor. "Come inside. You need to rest." The interior of the compound was a suffocating display of immense wealth. Floors of heated dark slate walls adorned with original contemporary art, and massive fireplaces that roared to life with the flick of a remote. Dominic led her to the east wing, opening the double doors to a master suite that overlooked the mist-covered lake below. "I had this room prepared for you weeks ago," Dominic said quietly, standing in the doorway. Clara walked in, her eyes scanning the space. In the corner of the massive suite was a fully functional state-of-the-art kitchenette. It featured a custom white enamel Le Cornu oven, gleaming copper pots hanging from an iron rack, and a sub-zero refrigerator stocked with imported butter vanilla beans and heavy cream. It was a baker's paradise, perfectly replicated, and dropped into the middle of a mafia stronghold. She turned around, staring at him with a mixture of horror and fascination. "You prepared this weeks ago. You were planning to kidnap me even before Lorenzo Costa attacked the Gala." "I was preparing a sanctuary," Dominic corrected, smoothly stepping into the room and closing the door behind him. "The underworld is shifting, Clara. Lorenzo has been buying off politicians and police commissioners. I knew a war was coming, and I knew that the moment he realized you were my weak point, he would strike. I simply built a place where you could survive it. I wouldn't be a target if you hadn't forced yourself into my life," she yelled, the numbness finally shattering, replaced by a white-hot fury. "I am a baker. I make wedding cakes and strawberry tarts. I don't belong in a bunker hiding from assassins." Dominic's jaw tightened. He walked toward a heavy oak desk in the corner of the room, opened a locked drawer with a biometric scan of his thumb, and pulled out a thick manila folder. He tossed it onto the glass coffee table between them. "You think you are just a baker, Clara," he said, his voice dropping to a harsh, gravelly whisper. "You think you stumbled into this world by accident. You didn't. You were born into it." Clara frowned, stepping hesitantly toward the table. "What are you talking about?" "Open it," he commanded. With trembling fingers, Clara reached down and flipped the heavy cover of the dossier open. The first page was a black-and-white photograph of a man she hadn't seen in 15 years. He looked younger, exhausted, but his kind eyes were unmistakable. "Dad," she whispered, her throat tightening. "Thomas Hayes." Dominic recited, his eyes locked on her face, watching her process the information. A brilliant mathematician, a loving father, and for 10 years the chief forensic accountant for the Costa crime family. Clara stepped back, shaking her head violently. No, that's a lie. My father was an actuary for an insurance firm in Manhattan. He died in a car accident when I was 11. He was an actuary on paper, Dominic corrected, gently stepping closer though he didn't touch her. In reality, he laundered hundreds of millions of dollars for Lorenzo Costa. But your father had a conscience, Clara. When Lorenzo started moving into human trafficking, your father couldn't stomach it. He started skimming money, not for himself, but to build a trust fund for you. A ghost account, entirely untraceable by the syndicate. Tears blurred Clara's vision as she leafed through the documents. Bank transfers, encrypted ledgers, and finally a police report of a fatal car crash. Lorenzo found out. Dominic continued, his voice heavy with grim finality. He had your father's brakes cut. It wasn't an accident. It was an execution. But before Thomas died, he managed to transfer the skimmed money into an irrevocable trust in your name. The same trust that magically cleared in your bank account when you turned 21. The same money you used to open Sugar and Lace. The room spun. The floor beneath Clara felt like it was dissolving. Her entire life, her pride in building her business from the ground up, her memories of her hard-working, honest father, was a carefully constructed lie funded by blood money. "Why do you know this?" she choked out, looking up at the monster standing before her. "Why do you have his files?" Dominic looked down at his hands, a rare flicker of vulnerability crossing his hardened features. "Because 5 years ago, Lorenzo realized the money was missing. He hired me my syndicate to find the leak. I tracked the money to you, Clara. I was supposed to report back to Lorenzo, hand you over, and let him collect his debt in blood." He took a step forward, finally closing the distance, and framed her face with his large, warm hands. His thumbs gently wiped away the fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. "But then I saw you," Dominic confessed, his dark eyes burning with absolute terrifying devotion. "I watched you paint the walls of your bakery. I watched you smile at your customers. I saw the light you carried in a city drowning in darkness. I couldn't give you to him. So I bought Lorenzo's debt myself. I paid him $20 million out of my own pocket, claiming I recovered the stolen funds from an offshore account. I wiped your slate clean, Clara. I saved your life." Clara stared into his eyes, paralyzed. "You stalked me for 5 years." "I protected you for 5 years," he corrected fiercely. "I built an empire strong enough to ensure Lorenzo could never touch you. But the secret couldn't stay buried forever. Lorenzo found out about the deception last month. That is why the Kensingtons attacked you at the Gala. That is why the war has started. I didn't drag you into my world, Clara. I am the only thing standing between you and the man who murdered your father." The silence in the room was deafening, broken only by the distant, howling wind outside the bulletproof glass. Clara looked at the dossier, then at the custom kitchen, and finally at the ruthless mafia boss who had silently engineered her survival. She wasn't a hostage. She was a queen on a chessboard who hadn't realized she was playing a game of life and death. "If Lorenzo wants to collect a blood debt," Clara said slowly, her voice losing its tremor, replaced by a cold, hardened edge she didn't know she possessed, "then he is going to have to come through me." Dominic's lips curved into a dark, predatory smile. "That's my girl." The assault came exactly 48 hours later, at 3 in the morning. It started with the violent mechanical groan of the compound's massive steel gates being blown off their hinges by military-grade explosives. The blast shook the foundation of the estate, sending a tremor through the heated slate floors of Clara's suite. Immediately the power was cut, plunging the entire fortress into pitch blackness before the red glow of emergency backup lights flickered to life. Dominic was out of bed and armed in less than 2 seconds, moving with the lethal fluid grace of a phantom. He tossed a heavy tactical Kevlar vest onto the mattress beside Clara. "Put that on and get into the reinforced panic room behind the kitchen pantry," Dominic barked, checking the magazine of his customized assault rifle. "Do not come out until I give you the all-clear code. If you hear someone else's voice, you don't make a sound." "Dominic, wait," Clara started, but he was already out the door, sprinting down the hallway toward the heavy gunfire erupting from the main foyer. Clara strapped the heavy vest over her silk pajama top. Her hands were shaking, but her mind was remarkably clear. For the first 26 years of her life, she had lived as a victim of circumstances she didn't understand. She had let people like Victoria Kensington mock her, and she had let men like Dominic orchestrate her fate. But as the deafening roar of automatic weapons echoed through the compound, Clara realized she was done hiding. She was Thomas Hayes's daughter. She moved toward the kitchen, completely ignoring the hidden panic room. Instead, she opened the heavy drawer near the La Cornue oven and pulled out her favorite tool, a massive, perfectly sharpened 10-inch forged German steel chef's knife. Outside her door, the sounds of battle were brutal and intimate. The heavy thud of bodies hitting the floor, the shattering of priceless artwork, and the visceral screams of wounded men painted a horrifying picture of the war raging in the halls. Suddenly, her bedroom door was kicked open. Clara pressed her back against the side of the refrigerator, sinking into the shadows. A massive man dressed in tactical gear stepped into the red-lit room, sweeping the area with a flashlight mounted to his rifle. He moved toward the bed, seeing the sheets thrown back. He never heard her coming. Clara lunged from the shadows, driving the heavy steel blade deep into the vulnerable, unarmored gap between the man's tactical vest and his collarbone. He let out a wet, gurgling gasp, dropping his rifle as he collapsed to the slate floor. Clara pulled the knife free, gasping for air, her hand slick with dark blood. She bent down, grabbed his dropped sidearm, a heavy Glock 19, and checked the safety. She had never fired a gun in her life, but the mechanics were simple enough. Point and pull. She stepped out into the hallway. The air was thick with the acrid smell of cordite burning wood and copper. Down in the grand foyer, the battle was reaching its bloody climax. Dominic and Vincent were pinned behind an overturned marble dining table, laying down, suppressing fire against a half-dozen of Lorenzo's mercenaries positioned near the blown-out entrance. But as Clara crept along the mezzanine, overlooking the foyer, she saw what Dominic couldn't. Lorenzo Costa himself, an older man in a bespoke grey suit, sporting a cruel, weathered face, and slicked-back silver hair had slipped through a side corridor. He was moving silently up the flank, a suppressed pistol raised, aiming directly at the exposed side of Dominic's position. Dominic was completely focused on the front entrance. He was going to die. The man who had bought her bakery, who had wiped her father's debt, who loved her with a terrifying, absolute obsession, was about to be executed in his own home. Time seemed to slow to a crawl. Clara didn't scream a warning. She knew Lorenzo would simply fire early. Instead, she raised the heavy Glock with both hands, rested her forearms on the glass railing of the mezzanine to steady her shaking muscles, and aimed down the sights. She didn't aim for his head. She aimed for the center of mass. She squeezed the trigger. The recoil was massive, sending a sharp jolt of pain up her arms, but the loud crack of the gunshot echoed violently in the grand foyer. Lorenzo Costa stopped dead in his tracks. His eyes widened in shock as a dark red stain rapidly blossomed across the chest of his immaculate grey suit. He dropped his pistol, taking one staggering step backward, before collapsing onto the marble floor, completely lifeless. The mercenaries at the front door, seeing their boss fall, instantly broke ranks and scrambled toward the exit, only to be cut down by Vincent and Dominic's retaliatory fire. Silence descended on the compound, heavy and suffocating. Dominic slowly rose from behind the marble table, his eyes scanning the room to see where the kill shot had come from. He looked up at the mezzanine. Clara stood there, the Glock still smoking in her hands, her silk pajamas smeared with blood, and the heavy Kevlar vest hanging off her shoulders. She looked down at him, her chest heaving, the remnants of the soft, innocent baker burned away by the fires of survival. Dominic stared at her, utterly, completely mesmerized. He didn't see a victim. He didn't see a liability. He saw a queen who had just claimed her throne in blood. He dropped his rifle, taking the stairs 2 at a time until he reached her. He didn't ask if she was okay. He didn't comfort her. He grabbed the back of her neck, pulling her in, and crashed his lips against hers in a bruising, desperate, intoxicating kiss. Clara dropped the gun, wrapping her bloody hands in his dark hair, kissing him back with a fierce, ravenous energy that matched his own. 3 months later, the doors of Sugar and Lace reopened on the Upper East Side. The bakery looked identical, smelling of fresh vanilla and spun sugar. But the woman behind the counter was different. Clara Hayes wore a sharp, tailored emerald green pantsuit that matched the color of the dress she had worn to the gala. She served her pastries with a brilliant smile, but her eyes held a dark, immovable confidence. Across the street, The black luxury sedan was parked in its usual spot. But Dominic Russo didn't come in to order a strawberry tart anymore. He didn't need to. Because when the bakery closed at 3 o'clock, Clara locked the doors, crossed the street, and slid into the passenger seat beside the Don of New York, ready to help him rule the empire she had helped secure. They had tried to mock her weight, her clothes, her existence. They had tried to break her. Instead, they had simply shown her the crown and handed her the monster who would help her wear it. What an intense journey from the bakery to the boardroom of the underworld. Clara proved that true strength isn't about fitting into society's glass slippers. It's about shattering the glass entirely and forging your own crown. If you loved the drama, the twists, and watching Clara transform from a mocked outsider into the undisputed queen of the syndicate, make sure you hit that like button. Share this story with anyone who loves a gritty high-stakes mafia romance, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more thrilling, pulse-pounding audio dramas. Until next time, stay fierce.